Let's look at Lesson 2. In Lesson 2, we will explore the third word. Let me read it for you to start. From Exodus chapter 20, verse 7 and following. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Okay. Now, before we take a look at this word, let me just say to you right up front that this is not a word about casual cussing. It is not even a word about serious cussing. This is a word about the character of our relationship with God. So let's unpack that a bit. A name in the Old Testament was a very powerful thing. Names both shaped and declared the character and essence of a person. Think about the stories in the early stories of the ancestors when Abram and Sarah then became Abraham and Sarah after the experience of the promise. But think about them waiting all of those decades for a child and longing and that kind of dust in the womb feeling that it all was going to end with them. And suddenly, against all odds to the contrary, Sarah is pregnant and gives birth to a child. They name the child Isaac. Laughter. Joy, just everything. Even when Sarah was told that she would have a baby long after the time for having babies had passed, her response to that was to laugh. Some people think that she was being derisive. I don't. I think that there was this bubbling up of joy that came out of her and eventually came out of her and became the child of promise, Isaac, laughter. Names are crucially important in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the New Testament as well. Think about Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her Hebrew name is Miriam, and that means rebellion. I love that. God had to look for a woman with a bit of rebellion in her to take on that challenge, don't you think? Significant life events or turnarounds resulted in name changes. As I said, Abram and Sarai become Abraham and Sarah after they receive the promise of God. Jacob becomes Israel after an all-night assault from God's own being on his person that changes him and leaves him with a limp, and his name changes after that, and the list goes on. Early in my ministry, when I was working for our General Assembly when we were still in Atlanta, Georgia, this was during the reunion years, and there was a woman who worked in our mail department. I didn't know her well, but I saw her, I greeted her, walked past her every morning when I went into work, and I know, and she had been a kind of quiet but sunny presence. And I noticed after a while that it was as if the light just went off in her. And I knew something was wrong, but I never really interacted with her much. We weren't friends, but I just wondered. I wondered about what was going on with her. There just seemed to be trouble. And this went on for quite some while, and then one day I came into work, and there she was again, just like she had been all those months before. There was a lightness behind her. She looked like she had been lit from within, and there was a lightness even to her being, as if she were walking around on tiptoes. And I stopped then, and I asked her, I said, wow, what is going on with you? You look fabulous. And she said, I've changed my name. And I said, oh. And she said, I've changed my name to, I'll just pick one because I don't have her permission. Let's just say her name was Angela. She said her first name was Angela. She said, I've changed my name to Angela, and I've taken as my last name my grandmother's first name. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Why did you do that? And she said, I was abused by my father from the age of 2 and by my husband from the age of 18. And she said, I am through with men's names. I have a new name, and I've chosen the name of the one person on this earth who always believed in me, who always loved me, who always made a space for a future for me. Names change things. They are powerful, powerful entities in the Hebrew Scriptures. To share a name with someone in Bible times, to share a name with someone was in some ways to make oneself vulnerable to the one to whom one gives that gift. In a sense, according to the biblical mindset, God puts God's self on the line by even sharing God's name with us. As God does, you'll remember, God shares God's own name with us, with Moses at the burning bush. It's the divine tetragrammaton, the 4 letters YHWH, which is really a verb, being. God puts God's self on the line, even sharing God's name with us. And when God gives us the name, somehow, mysteriously, we then have the capacity to wound God, to break God's heart. In sharing the name, God has gifted us with that power, and with other power as well, but has gifted us with that power that comes from making oneself vulnerable in love to another. It is awesome to contemplate. With that understanding, we come to see that this word is not about casually saying "Lawdy mercy" once in a while. It is about using the gift of God's name in a way that is inconsistent with who God is. This word can be translated, "Do not make mischief with my name. Do not make wrongful use of my name." And what it means is that we are not to trivialize our relationship with God, or to use God's name to try to get what we want in a selfish or a manipulative way. We are not to make God a means instead of an end. And there's more here. The third word reminds us that God will not be made into an ideological tool. God will not be made into a justification for our point of view. We know how to do those things these days, don't we? Here's the thing to remember. To try to harness or corral or manipulate or in any way subvert the power and person of God to accomplish goals that are really just our own is a powerful misuse of the name. It is a powerful violation of this word. Now, for God to tell us not to use the name wrongly is to say, do not misuse our relationship. Do not take this intimacy into which I have invited you. Do not take my love, my power, my ways for granted. Do not trivialize our relationship by assuming that I can be put in service to your wants and your desires, and especially not to your prejudices and your points of view. Now, have any of you ever prayed fervently in God's name for something only to look back years later and thank God that you didn't get it? It is so easy for us to assume that our deep desires are God's will. It is one of the ways that humans make idols out of our own selves and our own egos. In a soundbite world where attention spans are a blink and complex ideas are reduced to tweets, we know how to trivialize nearly everything to serve our wants and our desires. And that is troublesome in and of itself. But when we apply that standard to our relationship with God, it can be downright disastrous. Well, how do we do this? When we attempt to use God for our own gain, Any of you remember the old Janis Joplin song, "Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz?" A violation of the name. When we compartmentalize our faith and into one part of our life, and then there's life and then there's faith life, as if they are two different things with two different sets of values and rules, then we trivialize the name. We make mischief with the name. We make a mockery of the name. I remember a number of years ago when I was serving church in Birmingham, that beautiful church in Birmingham, I was a member of the Kiwanis Club. And it was a huge club. It was the oldest and the largest Kiwanis Club in the world. There were 300 of us, 500 of us. I don't even know how many. And we met every week for lunch. And at the time that the story I'm about to tell you, I was working on trying to raise money to acquire an old hotel that was kind of a flop house near our church, and I wanted to gut it and turn it into a center for homeless women and children. So I was going all over town trying to raise money. I needed $2.5 million and I had zip. And so I remember that people joked in those days that whenever I walked into a cocktail party, everybody needed to grab their wallets. But I was sitting at a table with a person that I knew to be quite influential in the city. I knew to be very faithful in his church. It wasn't a member of my church, it was in another suburban church. I knew him to be a leader in that church and just a really good person. Also, his company had great means, as he himself personally did. And I, in doing my research, had decided that, the ask that I wanted to ask of him for our project was $100,000. And so we're sitting there eating our salads, and I started in on my pitch that I had down to a science in those days. And I was talking with him from a point of view of faith, because what was happening with the homeless in the city in those days was an affront to God. And I knew that as a Christian, I thought that as a Christian, he would see that, and that would be the place that would connect him, and he would want to put his resources into the project. And I remember as I said that to him, he looked at me and he said, "Eugenia," he said, "all of that is for Sunday. This is business." And I was so taken aback by that. Because y'all, when we decide that God is for Sunday graces and not weekly business practices, and we claim to be a Christian, then we are making mischief with the name. We are violating the third word. When we keep silent in the presence of injustice while wearing a cross to work and getting insulted when Hanukkah candles are lit alongside a Christmas tree, y'all, we trivialize our relationship with God and we misuse the name. When God comes last in our checkbooks, behind the boat payment and the gym membership, we trivialize the name. When we attribute anything that is not anything that we have to our own ability and fail to see that everything is a gift from God and belongs to God, we fail the standard of the third word. To understand the heart of the third word, we must remember that God cannot be made into a justification of anything. Our points of view, our politics, our theological points of view, just nothing. In the early moments of our life together, God says, "I am your one and your only. I want you free. Don't substitute lesser things for me. And do not use my name and power to simply get what you want or to justify your ego's needs."